This episode of Bright Hearth is brought to you by the Kings Ridge Elderberries and by our supporters at patreon.com.
It is always a temptation to an armed and agile nation to call upon a neighbor and to say, "We invaded you last night. We are quite prepared to fight, unless you pay us cash to go away." And that is called asking for Danegeld, and the people who ask it explain that you've only to pay him the Danegeld, and then you'll get rid of the Dane. It is always a temptation for a rich and lazy nation to puff and look important and to say, "Though we know we should defeat you, we have not the time to meet you. We will therefore pay you cash to go away." And that is called paying the Danegeld. But we've proved it again and again, that if you have paid him the Danegeld, you'll never get rid of the Dane. It is wrong to put temptation in the path of any nation, for fear they should succumb and go astray. So when you are requested to pay up or be molested, you will find it better policy to say, "We never pay anyone Danegeld, no matter how trifling the cost, for the end of that game is oppression and shame, and the nation that pays it is lost." Danegeld, a poem by Rudyard Kipling.
Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. Galatians 6:1-2.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Bright Hearth. Brian Sauvé here, joined by my lovely bride.
It's been months since we've recorded 2 episodes at once.
Oh, they don't even know.
This is amazing.
You guys just realized this is a back-to-backer. We just finished recording
This means
last
my
week's
baby
episode.
is sleeping really well.
That's right.
And me, I guess, if I'm up late enough to record 2 episodes.
Yeah, you're like bright. You're in fine fluff and feather right now.
But I have honey butter on the other end of this episode.
Ooh, that's right. That's right. So let's get to it, babe. Let's get right to it. Last week, guys, we talked about the virtue of refusing to argue about stupid things and kind of how some ways not to fall in that ditch. And we said that often the vast majority of typical conflicts within a household or a church or friendships tend to be about stupid things you didn't need to fight about in the first place. And those small little dumb things were really just a stage where pride and stubbornness and scoffing and scorning and sarcasm and being quick to anger was doing a dance and putting on a display. So in this week's episode, we're going to talk about kind of, I suppose, not the opposite of that, but a different situation, right? Because a lot of times there's small little things that really you just need to be humble and cover the offense, or maybe it's not even an offense. You're annoyed and they didn't even do anything wrong. Today, we're going to be talking about what you need to do when you actually might have to pick a fight. And again, when I say pick a fight, I really don't mean going and punching someone in the mouth. I mean what Lexy just read in Galatians chapter 6.
Speak the truth in love.
Speak the truth in love. And so we're going to be just walking through essentially a process to assess when it is time to do this and how to think through that on your way to having that conversation. And this can happen quickly. This can also be something that you, in big things, take time and work through maybe and get counsel on as well. So we're going to jump into that. Real quick, a couple housekeeping things. Again, make sure you go to the link at the bottom of the description of the episodes for this season. There's a link to a form where you can send in your questions. And we're going to be devoting the next season of Bright Hearth, Season 4, to answering your top questions. This could be about marriage, parenting, family, the productive Christian household, church things, holistic things, head coverings. It could be about like how to, get your mustache to twirl just right, and maybe send in a question like that. And I don't know, guys, it's a daily battle. It's a daily battle. But make sure you do that and send in your questions so we're ready to rock for Season 4. All right, babe. So any last words before we jump in and get rolling?
Nada.
You're thinking about your honey butter, aren't you?
I'm actually thinking of my sick child.
That's true. Yeah. Okay, fine. That's fair. We have a sick child outside of our door 10 feet away. He's coughing and not doing well. So sorry, buddy.
He's okay.
Yeah. Mama's not thinking about honey butter. She's thinking about her babies. Okay. So let's talk about this. Here's the situation. You're in some sort of conflict, or you feel that you might be in some sort of conflict, or you have some issue with somebody. Maybe it's your spouse. Maybe it's an extended family member. Maybe it's a church member. Maybe it's a pastor. Maybe it's just someone in your life, and you have some sort of bone to pick. And you've been hearing us talk quite a bit in this season about covering offenses in Proverbs 19:11 and being hard to argue with and not being, easily provoked. So you might be thinking, well, am I ever allowed to say anything to anybody? Are they allowed?
Yes.
Yes.
Believe it or not, yes.
In fact, sometimes because we are Christians, we are required to actually go do the hard thing of dealing with a conflict. Some things are not the type of offenses that can be covered over or should be ignored. Some things are not misunderstandings. Sometimes people are caught in trespasses. Sometimes there are sins that are being committed. And when it's our duty and when we have proper jurisdiction and we're not grabbing a passing dog by the tail, sometimes we do need to go and get involved or to say something or do that Galatians 6:1 sort of thing. So that's what we're going to talk about. And the first level, this is sort of a flow chart that you can work through. You don't. There's obviously more we could say, and I think that you don't have to do every single one of these in order every single time. But this is systematically, I think, how you might think about assessing that question. Should I say something, and what kind of spirit? How do I prepare to go and have that conversation? So this is a flow chart for how to think through whether you need to say something and how to. And the first question that is one of the most important questions to ask that a lot of times we don't is simply, do I have jurisdiction?
Yeah, that's true actually. Yeah, I have a friend who will often ask like, "Hey, I feel really strongly about this thing. I might want to talk to a friend in another place. Should I do it or should I not do it?" And that's often the conversation we end up having is like, I don't know if it's really your jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Only we don't use that terminology, but
sure.
Like, don't be a busybody in someone else's church congregation, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So sometimes there's situations where, maybe you're looking from afar at a friend and they're doing something maybe you don't like or you don't think is wise, but like they're actually listening to their pastor or their church, or maybe they're a little different situation than you. And you just sometimes have to go, this is not my jurisdiction.
Yeah. And I think it's a good sign that my friend has come to me multiple times and said that, because then it's like, okay, let's pray for them instead.
Is this, maybe there's an issue with a family that I'm looking at in my church or something like that, and I'm wondering what's going on. Seems like there's an issue. Sometimes, especially if you know that the people whose jurisdiction it is are dealing with it, like if the pastors are involved or somebody else, friends are coming alongside, a lot of the time the instinct for us to go pile in is actually the instinct to gossip and just wanting to know all the details of what's happening all the time. A lot of times we just need, it's not my problem.
Business.
It's not my business. Even though we're called to love, like in the church membership, the members make vows to pursue the purity and peace of the church. That doesn't mean grabbing every passing dog by the tail. No. Yeah. So the first question is like, simply before I go through and like try to figure this whole thing out, am I even the one who's supposed to be doing this? Yeah. Yeah. Is it my parent and they're above me in the hierarchy, and I'm not even supposed to be the one to do this? I'm not supposed to correct my parents' theology all the way to the bottom. I'm not supposed to a lot of the time when you do that question, you'll be surprised that some of the times you, in good conscience, you can say, I'm going to pray for them, but this is actually not my responsibility. Okay, now don't let that be an excuse to not act. Yeah. To be like, oh, I don't know. It's like, do I really, am I my brother's keeper? Okay. Number 2, second step here, and this is very, very important. Probably one of the most important steps on this list is to soberly assess the central or foundational issues or concerns that you have and give a name to those issues and provide adequate justification to demonstrate that they are genuine. So in your mind, on paper, without gossiping around 50 people, what is the issue that I have in this situation? And I'm going to name it. And I'm going to try it as much as I can to give it a name the Bible gives a name to, Yeah, the times that I've done this, I don't, sometimes I will sit on confronting, okay, I'll just think of you. Okay.
I don't let myself talk to you if I'm just like vaguely annoyed.
Right. Yeah.
I really do sit on things sometimes because I'm like, no, I do want something more specific. I need to think it out today, not in order to like rehearse it or slander you in my mind, but like I want this to be a profitable conversation, which means I need to be profitable with what words I'm even choosing.
Yeah, like if I'm saying that someone is sinning,
yes,
I should be able to give a pretty clear explanation of what that sin is.
Yeah.
Or what that failure of wisdom is.
Mm-hmm.
And also to demonstrate with some clear evidence that it happened. So not like...
No, that's true.
Remember last episode we talked about assuming motives.
Yeah.
So sometimes we can do this thing where we're like, they're being unkind. And you say, well, in what way were they unkind? I don't know. He said there was a couple unclear things, and it just seemed like it seemed like he was mad at me. And so he's being unkind. You're like, well, let's get specific before we say somebody is sinning.
Yeah. So Lou Priolo's book, The Heart of Anger, actually really, which is good for peacemaking, I do think in some ways.
Really good book.
For children specifically. Yeah. But I remember him talking about lawful loves and unlawful affections and how like for every sin, there is a biblical solution to that. Mm-hmm. Just because I had an issue with this where somebody was not very specific. They were obviously upset with me. Even they were like, I don't really know how to explain it to you though. Mm-hmm. And I really struggled for probably about 2 years of like knowing how to be in relationship with that person because I felt they were unfairly accusing me of stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know what stuff. Yeah. But that was the problem, was that I had nothing specific enough to repent from.
Right.
And you had to help me work through like, they just were not thinking clearly in how that was affecting you and the way they communicated it to you. So you can overlook this. And I really praise God that I really do feel like there was a lot of mending that happened there, but that was such a good lesson for me to, when I do talk to people, to be very specific, or you're being very unkind to that person. Right. You're heaping condemnation on them.
And they're anxious and they're like, it's like an employee that doesn't have a clear job description. And then his boss says you're not doing well.
You're like,
it's like, but what am I not doing well? Years ago, there was a guy in a church that was upset with me, and to the point brought charges. Like, I think Brian's in sin in these ways. They were real sins. The names were real sins. Like it was, you're really proud. And I remember the elders were like, okay, well, give an example. Yeah. What's your evidence? Like, and what it came down to when they got clear, they didn't know. And so by the time they were done talking, it was like Brian was really confident that he was correct about the interpretation of this doctrine. And it was like a really important, it was like Calvinism or something. I'm like, well, I am. As a pastor, I'm actually called to proclaim the word of God with authority. And so they were actually making a mistake. They thought that something was pride that actually wasn't. And the way that we were able to sort that out is because there was a name for it. And then the elders came in and said, let's get specific about the evidence. So it's important. If you can do this before you go to somebody else, you'll save yourself a lot of trouble if you realize in your internal assessment, I'm actually just mad at this person because I disagree and they didn't sin.
Yeah, or like I didn't get enough sleep last night.
Yeah.
And it's okay to admit that. Like, admit that to yourself. You'll be happier in the long run.
The Lord knows our frame. He knows our dust, that we're dust.
Yeah.
So it's okay to be humble and say, you know what? I was annoyed. I shouldn't have been.
Yeah.
And a lot of times the need to go and do something will die there. You realize I don't have a specific charge. I'm just vaguely annoyed, maybe a personality conflict. Mm-hmm. I don't like this person naturally. They're not like me.
They have different values. They emphasize, their spiritual gifting is different than mine. Their strengths are different than mine. It's okay.
Yeah. Like grave people can sometimes think that people who are more funny by nature are unserious people,
But you are.
What?
Unserious people.
Oh, I'm not a funny person. Okay. I'm just kidding. Actually, kind of.
Crickets.
That wasn't funny. All right, next. So that's really important. Soberly assess it. Get your central foundational issues or concerns. If you have to write this down, write it down. Look up the verses. Make sure you have receipts.
Yeah. Well, and
show it's genuine.
I was thinking about it. This is the reason why. It's because if Matthew 18 is true, going to the person one-on-one, each higher authority that you're going to, that gets more and more serious. So you better have an actual case actual evidence, actual witnesses.
Yeah.
Like, don't go to them unless you're willing to take that same exact evidence to the elders the next day if you need to,
Yes. And so when you do that, you're going to get clearer. You're going to hopefully get clarity on at least what you're thinking.
Yeah.
You still need to be open to being wrong.
Yeah.
And being corrected.
Yeah.
But you're able to articulate clearly and calmly without heat. This is the issue. And here's where I see this issue played out. Here's some examples or evidence. Then the next step, this is, I think, also very important, is to stop and ask yourself, how are my emotions coloring my interpretation of the situation?
Mm-hmm.
So are my feelings aligned with reality, or are my feelings coloring my perception of reality? Do I just, again, not like this person and I've never really liked them, and for some reason, like this happens, guys.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just meet someone, you're like, I don't like your face.
You will love them better by admitting that to yourself.
Yeah.
It's not unchristian to say, I mean, you can pray for the Lord to change.
Yeah, it doesn't mean being okay with it,
Yeah.
but it's good to admit it.
Yeah. Like you do lawfully owe them charity and kindness.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
Patience, but you don't lawfully owe them best friend status.
Right. And so it's like, another example would be maybe there's a legitimate sin that happened, but then you were so offended by it that you started to look for sin everywhere.
Yes.
And maybe you realized that you had 8 sins on your list and really only 3 of them were legit. And the other ones are just, you were just emotional.
Overly fastidious about things too, maybe.
You were just worked up and you started to like treat them like a Pharisee. You were straining out gnats in their character. And it's like, well, who can stand? And that's the other thing, is like, who can stand? If somebody else were to judge me according to the measure I'm currently, this emotional, I'm angry at them measure, would I be able to stand up against this measure?
Mm-hmm.
Well, use a measure you want to be measured against. Our friends Trevor and Autumn Perkins own and operate the Kings Ridge Elderberry Farm in East Central Indiana. They believe, as Psalm 24:1 says, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. From the antioxidant and vitamin-rich berries to the knowledge of plants and soils and the ridge where their plants are cultivated. They grow American elderberries because their berries have higher quantity and more stable antioxidants than their European counterparts.
The Kings Ridge is a quality-oriented family farm focused on building Christendom. Whether you need tasty elderberry syrup or want the highest quality, fresh frozen juice or berries for making syrups, jams, pies, or wine, don't buy dried European elderberries and support the global economic agenda. Visit tkrfarm.com and purchase your elderberry needs from the Kings Ridge Elderberries.
That's tkrfarm.com, or click the link in the description of this episode. So number 3, this is actually not number 3, it's number 4, whatever. I'm not going to number them anymore, guys. The next step, let's just call it the next step, is to do an inventory of your own actions, words, and overall communication or participation in the situation. Basically asking yourself, all right, have I been kind, gentle, patient, loving, etc., and acted justly before the Lord with a clean conscience? Or have I been maybe irritable, easily offended, rude, angry? Doing an inventory. And this isn't to excuse this. What I'm not saying is that what we're going to do is we're going to set all the sins next to each other, and provided I had just as many sins as them, they all cancel out and none of them need to be dealt with. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But recognizing how did I contribute to the sinfulness of this situation with my own sin?
That's true. And
often with our kids, this is an important one, because it's like, it was a really hard day. Everybody was being really naughty maybe, and I'm going to have a family sit down with the kids and be like, there's going to be some consequences for how the behavior was today. But then you realize, you know what, mommy and daddy contributed.
It was our fault. Yeah.
we did not help. And so it's not that we're not going to deal with that, but it's that we are going to deal with our sin while we're dealing with that. We're going to confess it. We're going to say, mommy and daddy did not help. We got frustrated and raised, whatever it was, lost a temper, was rude, sarcastic, whatever it is. So that can happen, anytime. Basically asking myself, is there anything that when I'm approaching this person that if I do approach them, I need to make sure that I bring and say, and by the way, I know that I'm supposed to be the one who's like, you are spiritual, restore such one. And in order to do that, I need to deal with my own stuff. Mm-hmm. And then next, it's important this is really difficult to do. I'm just going to be honest here. I don't know how good people are at this, But I think it's really important.
I'm great at it.
She doesn't even know what it is. She's great at it.
Great.
Maybe you are. You tell me how to do this then, okay?
Oh, dear.
Which is to soberly assess the perspective of the other person in the best light you can. Like, do they have any legitimate concerns? Is there, something maybe that from their perspective would put this situation in a different light than from your perspective?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that does make sense. It's just being overly charitable towards the other person, which drives me. It used to, but now it's taught me. It used to drive me insane when you would do this, because I'd be like, "No, this is this is a real problem, Brian," and you'd be like, I just think no, probably not. Like that whole time.
I don't sound like that.
No, you don't.
I hope I don't.
No, you don't. That sounds effeminate. When you sound very masculine.
Thanks, babe. No, this is
I'm
important.
Distracted. Okay, so the time you already shared, when the person brought charges against you,
yeah.
I was like, this is serious. This is like your job. And by the way, we're building a house. Did you know that we're building a house right now? And this is your job. And I could not believe how kind you were being about this person. And I'm serious. You were really being very kind about this person. And I know you have major beef with this person. And I was like, this is your livelihood, though. Are you sure that you're going to be this kind about them? And you were, and it's funny because people online probably don't believe you're that charitable, but you really are genuinely a very charitable human being. Goodness gracious.
Probably. Maybe there's probably a ditch somewhere that I could fall in there, but it is important because I want people to do that for me.
Yeah,
I'll
exactly.
Put it that way.
That's what I mean is you've taught me very well, like the whole with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. It's important.
So another example actually along these lines from our just church ministry history. This is our life, so this is the examples that we think of. But I think of over the years, there have been lots of people who have left our church or whatever, and some of them have been angry. This is just part of pastoring, but particularly if you're going to be theologically maximalist, culturally maximalist, if you're going to say things like you shouldn't put your kids in public school and, Calvinism is true, and you're going to have people who leave the church. That's fine. One of the things that was helpful for me to get over being personally offended when people left for doctrinal issues was to realize that if the roles were reversed, let's say that I was in a church that was dispensationalist or something really strongly, and I became convinced of postmillennial covenantalism. Well, for the sake of that church and its peace, I should leave. I should probably go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so when people do that the other direction, even though I'm convinced of my views and I think they're wrong, and I want a dialogue, I want to talk to them and be given a chance as their pastor to give them the best materials on the subject and really talk to them. And that's where a lot of people fail. They fail to actually seek out from their pastor, okay, I'm going to give you a shot to convince me, to change my mind. Mm-hmm. That's a failure there. But when I think on the other, say that someone does that, now if someone does leave and they're like, I just have a genuine, serious enough theological disagreement, I can't in good conscience fellowship here, I'm totally at peace about that. Because I want to be treated that way too.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want people to be all hurt if I have a genuine conscience disagreement with them about what is true.
Yeah, they're not trying to do a church split, so better off to say.
Yep. And other people still sin. So it's important just try to get in their shoes and just try to think okay, is there an angle? Is there some charity that I can give? Can I think what are they thinking? Why are they doing this? And even if it helps you actually more accurately assess the sin. If you still conclude they're sinning, a lot of the times you'll realize, okay, they're sinning, but now that I think about it, this person came from this family and their dad was a crazy abusive drunk or something like that. And so now I'm going to be I need to actually be really tender and compassionate and maybe still firm with different situations, but I'm going to go into it with the way that I think when we need to not forget that it's the kindness of God that leads us to repentance, and that Christ is slow to anger, that he's patient with us, and that he knows us perfectly, and he's still all those things.
Yeah, and I think it also helps you pray for the other person and to better prepare even in how to talk to them.
Yeah.
To be a genuine help to them and not just a hammer. Again, I just want to prove my point.
Mm-hmm.
is if you can, really get in their shoes. And so there have been times for me where this is required, even like understanding a friend to read a book.
Mm-hmm.
Read a book to understand, like, where did they come from? Why do they think that way? Why do they act that way when this comes up? Why don't they believe this?
Yep.
And again, not that it necessarily changed my mind at all, because it hasn't and didn't, and kind of strengthened my views.
Yeah.
But it does help you better love the other person.
Exactly. And you can demonstrate that in the action and the difficulty you went to.
Yeah, exactly.
To say, I still disagree, but I really tried, and I want to do the work. So that's important. I think the next step in the flow chart here is to determine if any of the concerns that you've established at this point can be overlooked, covered over, and which of them cannot be. Because a lot of times it'll be multiple things.
Yeah.
And there might be 4 things, and what you really realize is that 3 of them are not the point right now. But there's one central thing. And this is how the Lord often deals with us in sanctification. Exactly. So ask questions like, would it please God to overlook blank aspect of my issues with blank, with this person? Or would it be cowardly and a failure of love to love this person if I did cover it up, covered it over? And look, give you an extreme example here. Okay. Is it loving to cover the offense if somebody annoys you with a passing remark? It's not a genuine character trait, and but they bugged you and you do it. You're like, look, would it please God for me to cover that offense? Probably. Would it please God to cover the offense if you found out that an uncle is molesting the children? Absolutely not. You would be in flagrant sin if you covered that offense. In fact, you would be participating in the sin at that point if you did. So clearly we know that there is a range here where you have an extreme where it's like you're actively in sin if you don't bring something up, all the way to pretty obviously this is something to overlook. Mm-hmm. So what you need to do is look at your list and say, what category do these fall in? And it's genuinely going to be an issue of wisdom in a lot of cases.
Yeah. Yeah, I was trying to think of some hard and fast rules, but I kept thinking of exceptions. But I do think in general, 2 questions I have thought of for myself are like the jurisdiction question.
Yeah.
That's an easy one. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I know for sure there's been certain circumstances where I've had to confront people I did not want to, but I know it's because I'm literally the only person that can speak into this situation, either because of like experience or relational jurisdiction again. The other thing is if that person's sin is continuing to bleed out and affect a lot of other people, typically that's when I'm like, okay, somebody has to step up and have this conversation. Yeah. Like, for example, when there have been people we've had, well, not people, it's not like it happens all the time. There was a man that was excommunicated from the church. Mm-hmm. And that would not have been appropriate for you guys to have gone on without excommunicating him, because there was actual harm happening to other families.
That's right.
It was bleeding out at that point, and you had to go to that length of confronting him and excommunicating. Yeah. So I think for a wife, this is an example that I can think of with wives, are his sins continuing to harm the children? And will it be a generational thing that now has to be dealt with?
Yeah, yeah.
So, like abuse, adultery, drunkenness, drugs. What's the other one where you go to a lottery?
Gambling, extremely unwise foolish financial decisions.
And there's a difference between, hey, my husband's not that great at this and he's growing in this with some of those. But like, if you know that your husband has an issue and you're actively covering, like seeking to, either because you feel embarrassed by it or you're just being a coward, your kids have to deal with that though.
That's right. Yeah.
So you need to be the big girl and put your big girl pants on.
And the way you cover the offense in that sense, in that like we're trying not to publicly shame other people. That's part of covering the offense, is to recognize that sometimes people's sins have put them in a position where they would be ashamed in the midst of the congregation. Mm-hmm. And so one way that you can do this is to recognize that there are jurisdictional issues, like my elders need to be aware of this. Mm-hmm. And so maybe as a wife, if there's a serious issue like that, I'm not going to be able to confront my husband necessarily, but I might need to go and ask the elders.
Well, yeah, and also, because that is the thing. You don't want it to get so blown out of proportion that then it is public. So do it earlier. Confront them earlier then.
Go.
So his face isn't plastered on the front of the news, you know?
If you have questions at this point, it's very important. So don't go and gossip and talebear, but do feel free to talk to an elder at your church, a trusted elder at your church, because an elder at your church, you have to remember it's their job to care for your soul. They would be annoyed with you if they knew that there had been this big thing and you never told them about it.
Yeah.
And because their job is to shepherd you.
Yeah.
So if there's a big wound or if there's an issue, go tell them, trust them to be discreet and to not just take your word for it, but to, they need to establish facts and they need to, but a good elders will step in and help you even work through this. And maybe you realize like, okay, this is something I need to just have a private conversation first, whatever it is. In any situation where you're really concerned that you don't know clearly what your responsibility is, it's okay to seek wise counsel before you go swinging. But it's also okay. A lot of the time, people are just scared to go talk to your brother.
More often than not, that's what it is they're scared.
They're just scared of hard conversations. And one way to stop being scared of hard conversations is to have more of them.
Yeah.
And the Lord will be faithful to give you more hard conversations to help you grow.
Yeah, and we've said this before, but there's never a moment where it's suddenly not awkward and then you want to open your mouth, so just start it.
Yep.
And something you've helped me realize recently is that it's okay to like say we're doing the best we can to counsel in this situation with the knowledge that we have.
Yeah.
We're not trying to actively sin. There might be more evidence later that helps change your opinion on this.
Yeah.
But we're trying to do the best we can right now, and we can proceed.
Yes.
That has helped me in a few spots that I was feeling really stuck on, like, don't do anything at all.
Yeah, you don't have to have the whole problem fixed to take the first step.
Correct.
So when you've done all of this, and you have still remaining a brother's caught in a transgression, you're thinking Galatians 6:1. You have jurisdiction. You've searched. You've assessed what is your things to repent of. If there are any, you're not being emotional, or you've thought from their perspective. You're being charitable. You're using a generous measure with them, and you need to go and talk to them. Okay, so again, it's very tempting at this point to go off and talk to 6 other people. Don't do it. Go talk to them. So the last 2 steps are pretty straightforward. And the first, the second to last step here is just determine a plan of action. How, when, and in what medium to address the issue. Okay, is this a lot of times it's not a text issue, and people want to text because they're scared, or an email issue, or a phone call issue. Sometimes it can be a phone call. There are things where that's fine, but just figure out what medium is appropriate to deal with this issue. Where, when. Try to find an ideal time where you're setting them up to succeed. You're not grabbing them in the middle of
that's what I was going to say.
Right before church.
You don't want to ambush them.
Yeah, and you also don't want to do the thing where you're like, I would like to set up a meeting with you.
Please
in a month
don't do that.
to
next
talk about
month.
some concerns.
We'll do it next month though, so you have 4 weeks to stress about it.
Don't do that to people.
Please don't
do that. So I'm not going to give you a play-by-play because it's so different from situation to situation. But just be aware, be sensitive to the person. Figure out what you're going to do. I'm going to go talk to them. I know what I'm going to say. I'm going to do it without heat. I'm going to be kind, gracious. I'm going to keep watching myself lest I be tempted. And then lastly, pray for the person. Before you talk to them, pray for the person you have the issue with. Ask for God to bless them. Ask for God to give you and them a humble attitude to be able to resolve the conflict quickly, fully, and in accordance with His word, that God would be glorified, they would be blessed, because that's the goal.
Yeah, and I've said this before, but what's most helpful to me, so I don't forget, and the reason forgetting is important is because if you forget, then you start to get emotional and kind of make things up instead of sticking to the point. So just do like a bullet point list so that you can remember what you're trying to say and get through it more quickly. And like we've already said, where words are not lacking, where words are many, sin is not lacking.
Yep.
So try and be as concise as possible. And seriously, guys, make a bullet pointed list then.
Yeah. And I want to end it here by explaining why we read the poem at the beginning we did in the cold open. It's a poem called the Danegeld, And you may have been really confused, and you're like, what did that have to do with anything? I want to explain it because this is an important point, that the Danegeld was in the early British world. So it was the Anglo-Saxons, which eventually, they're in England, essentially. But this was the first, like a 10th century kind of time. And the Danes, the Vikings,
naughty Vikings,
kept coming and sailing over, and then they were raiding and like pillaging and raping and destroying all of the Anglo-Saxon villages, towns, cities. And they would just come. It was like a seasonal thing. When the weather was right, they would show up, and they would just rub you blind. Okay?
I was so annoyed when I read Ben Merkel's book about the Vikings.
On King Alfred.
I just wanted to spank them all.
And what some of the towns started to do is pay what they called the Danegeld, which was a payment in gold or some kind of currency or valuables that they would basically pay the Danes and be like, okay, let's just pay you instead of killing us and robbing us, and then you can leave. And you'll get something, and we'll be fine. Everybody will be happy.
Oh, my gosh.
But the thing was, like, when you paid the Danegeld, what ended up happening was that they were liars, so they would just take the Danegeld, and then they would kill you.
And they knew that you guys were cowards and weaklings.
Yeah, and they would, like, take advantage of the Christian faith of the Anglo-Saxons. And they did this repeatedly and repeatedly. So Rudyard Kipling wrote this poem about never taking the Danegeld. And the reason we did that is because when you're faced with conflict like this, you have lots of other false solutions. Mm-hmm. One of them is like, I'm going to ignore. One of them is I'm going to essentially try to sin my way out of it. I'm going to try to gossip my way out of it. Mm-hmm. Basically, what you're trying to do there is pay off the flesh in some way. You're paying the Danegeld to the flesh somewhere, whether the other person's flesh or your flesh. And a lot of the time, I think the Danegeld is cowardice. Mm-hmm. We're paying the duty of cowardice to, or maybe a better way of putting it is we're paying the currency of silence to the enemy of cowardice instead of confronting in love and helping. So don't pay the Danegeld. Don't pay the Danegeld. Do the hard thing. Go make peace. Make real peace. Not a fake peace where you're just like, oh, there's never any problems. Or
I want to make one more comment.
Yeah.
Since we're talking about confronting, we do typically err on the side of covering over offenses. So please don't think that we're jumping down people's throats all the time.
Yeah.
But something I have tried to explain to women in really hard circumstances, marriage-wise, who refuse to confront their husbands, I have tried to explain to them, if you confront him, it's going to be more expedient to prove the sin or not.
Right.
Because either they're going to react badly and continue sinning, and it's going to be more obvious, or you can drag this out for years on end, allowing that sin that you know is there to infect other areas of life and ruin other areas of life.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, you still have to confront the issue.
Yeah.
So there are times that you doing it quicker is more expedient to proving what's actually going on.
Yeah, doing it quickly, respectfully, and with a willingness to forgive and put away the sin.
Yes.
The second that it's, like, I receive you, the sins, we're done. We're moving past it. Thank you, respectfully.
Yeah.
And doing that in a helpful way, thinking I'm his helper, and I can't nag him into righteousness. That's not what we're talking about. You can't nag your husband. And a lot of ladies that are like, yeah, that's right, I'm going to confront him. Like, the problem is they're actually falling in the ditch of they're actually naggers.
Yeah.
And they're probably seeing sins that aren't even sins. They're probably just annoyed with his maleness or something like that. But, his differentness. What we're talking about is when you've gone through that sober assessment and you're like, look, there's this thing I think is a blind spot that I could genuinely be helpful. I could say, I see this issue. Can you help me? Am I right? Is this a real issue? Or is there something going on I don't understand? It's just helping one another. Mm-hmm. And a good husband will be very thankful. That's why I think it's important that husbands give their wives permission, even say, like, if there's something that you see in me that is a lack, or whether it's a forgetting or I give the example all the time. If I tell Lexi, if I forget to do catechism at night, because I will, like, we get in the dinner rush and doing stuff and cleaning up, and then before we know it, it's like we're doing baths and bedtime and I've forgotten. I'm like, please remind me. It's not nagging me. You're a helper to me. Please help me do this because it's important. So, any last words, babe?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. There's so much more that we could say, guys.
No, there is a lot more that I feel like we could say, but it's just there's no.
Stop it.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is another one that it's a complicated issue. Maybe send in questions that you have about it for season 4, and we'd be glad to maybe if a lot of folks ask more questions about this, we can put them in that season as well. But in the meantime, guys, thanks so much for listening. Thank you for all of our supporters. At Patreon, if you sign up to support the show, then you will get access to our patron exclusive show In the Kitchen, which is just a real bite-sized, roughly weekly podcast that we put out just to patrons, answering questions, talking about lots of practical stuff. We put out different resources that we only put out on Patreon there as a thank you for everybody helping us make this show possible. And again, just the Lord bless you. We hope that this season serves to help you make real, true, lasting gospel peace in your homes, with your children, your extended family, church family, friends, and that maybe there are issues that you've been dealing with for years and years, that the Lord would use some of these things we've been talking about to give peace where there hasn't been peace for a long time. So the Lord bless you, cause his face to shine upon you. We'll see you next time on Bright Hearth.